Hello, welcome back to another Writerly Witterings in my outdoor office. And this is just a quick one because I was asked by someone whether it's true that publishers now tend not to edit authors' works. And then he went on to ask about editing for people's views. And I've got to check on the terminology used because it's one of those things you don't want to get wrong. So, sensitivity editing, that's right. Oh dear. Right. In terms of, do we get copy edits? Yes, we do. Yes, and in fact, I'm delighted to say that even books that have been published for some time, sorry, the dog's disappeared in the middle distance there, even books that have been published already will get what my editor calls a copy edit plus. So they'll check for grammar, they'll check for spelling, they'll check for, in my books, the historical accuracy. They check every aspect, which is great. Do all firms do that? Good God, no. No, they don't. The bigger firms, the bigger publishing houses will all do that. They'll all have their own copy editors and people involved in-house. Mostly freelancers rather than directly in-house, but they do still use people because it's a sign of real incompetence on the part of a publisher if one of their main duties, i.e. editing the book and getting it ready for sale, if they don't comply with that. It's a fairly vital bit of their job. But there are so many smaller, newer companies now, and some of them are diabolically bad. So the only thing I recommend for people who are aspiring authors is, if you're considering a publisher, don't do anything or sign anything until you've actually had a chance to read some of their books and see how well they edit and so on. Because some of them really, they might just as well not have bothered at all. Sensitivity editing. It is getting quite ridiculous. In one of my books, which was Portrait of a Murder, I mentioned that the main protagonist, the main investigator, Nick Morris, had a Morgan motor car. And I wanted to have the Morgan in there to remind myself what it used to be like, because I used to own a Morgan going back to the 1980s. I ordered it in the late 1970s and it finally arrived in about 1987. So it was a long waiting list in those days. And then because every firm I worked for went bust and let me go without any sort of compensation, I was forced to sell it after 4 or 5 years. And I should just say, I'm going to have a video before too long for people who have lost their jobs, because it is such a diabolical situation in the States now, where people who have not done anything wrong, who are perfectly competent at their job, are being fired by a multi-billionaire for no reason. It makes me extremely angry. So I want to just have a video to let everyone know it's not easy, certainly, but you know, things will only get better. But going back to the question of editing for people's impressions, I have a straightforward attitude. I put in my books what I think are correct for the period I'm writing about. I put in place people who have nasty and unpleasant views, nasty and unpleasant opinions, and I explain things from their point of view, because that is the point of a bloody novel. The whole point for me is trying to let people see why people think the way they do, why they feel the way they do, and in order to do that, you have to use suitable language. So I am not at all sympathetic with the idea of censorship, of the words going down, because that can destroy the whole effect of a novel. Have I had sensitivity editors? Yes, I have. I had one that, when she saw me talking about the Morgan, I used a term for the Morgan that I always did use, which was Mi'kmaq, with an M for mother, because a lot of Morgan owners call their little darlings a Mi'kmaq. There's nothing insensitive about that or rude. However, this sensitivity editor thought it sounded really nasty, so she checked on the internet and found one site that said it was a derogatory racist term. Now, I lived through the 60s and 70s and 80s, and there used to be a television programme which was all about the racism of one white English family when a black guy moved in next door. And they talked about the nignog with an N for no. So the sensitivity trainer saw this one reference and said, oh no, Jex can't use that. Well, it's in the book. If you think I'm going to bow down to that sort of nonsense with a sensitivity trainer who is simply certainly not going to listen to that. Then again, I've had people complaining when I use the word snigger. S-N-I-G-G-E-R. This has absolutely no relationship to any form of racism. It is simply the English version of snicker with a C-K-E-R. It's the English spelling, and it has been the English spelling since the 1600s. I've also had complaints about niggardly. Niggardly, which just means tight-fisted, not someone who's going to spend out a lot of money for no reason. Am I going to edit that out? Am I hell? So yes, I've had experience of sensitivity trainers, and as you can probably guess, I am not that enamoured of them. Trouble is, of course, you make these little videos and then as soon as you get home you think of other problems. Because the ideas that immediately occurred to me while I was out walking were just simply those two Old English terms and the expression for an organ. But then there's other things that are equally rather surprising to me, such as, for example, in a recent book I had, the sensitivity editor came up with the concern that I was using a rather derogatory term. Now, this was a term for ladies of negotiable virtue. Thank you to Terry Pratchett for that wonderful description of ladies of the night. But it was a modern day book and I used the expression prostitute, and I was told in no uncertain terms I really couldn't use that because so many women might be offended by it. They were much happier with whore, they were happier with sex workers, they were happy with all sorts, but not with prostitute. And I find that utterly baffling, I really do. Anybody who's involved in that business is probably not going to be overly concerned about what they're called because they'll have got themselves inured to it anyway. In addition, anybody involved in that business, I honestly can't imagine that they would have any sort of ranking between prostitute and whore as being more or less offensive. It's just bizarre. And it brings me down to the basic argument I have, which is I do not believe in censorship. I do believe in free speech. Yes, with limitations. I'm afraid I do not agree with people performatively saluting in a particularly unpleasant fashion, let us say. I'm not too sure which phrases you can use on YouTube anymore because it's censored. But it is quite clear to me that people should be allowed to buy whatever book they want and read it. And there are going to be some books that they find offensive. Now, I have never read Lolita, and I am not likely to. It sounds pretty damned obscene to a bloke who's got a daughter and a wife. I think that many other books just would not appeal to me because of the quality of the writing or the themes that are in those books, which is great. I do not expect them to be censored or removed from the shelves just because I find them offensive, because I have every right to be offended, but the writer has every right to offend me. And if I buy the book, then I've accepted that I might be offended. Okay, and I can, if I don't like the book, I can throw it away or give it away, do something with it. But the idea that a group might find something offensive and therefore that book must be banned, or those phrases must be banned, or that string of letters must be banned is not just ludicrous, it is itself the far more offensive attitude. So as far as I'm concerned, if people don't like my books, that's great. Don't buy them. And that's the attitude that I take with all of these matters. Sorry, I just had to add that when I got back home because it was ticking over at the back of my mind all the way back. I feel so much better for having got that off my chest. Right, I better walk back now, it's lunchtime. Thanks a lot for listening, thanks a lot for watching. If you're interested in these videos, do please think about giving a super thanks, like it, subscribe, all the stuff that you always hear from everybody. If you're interested in any links in how to do that, they're going to be below. But for now, say bye-bye to the river tour, and I'll speak to you soon. Here's a little clip of the area.